I would like you to close your eyes for just a moment. Take a slow, deep breath and try to recall a very specific scent from your childhood. Perhaps it is the rich, earthy aroma of toasted caraway seeds dancing in a heavy iron pot, or the sweet, comforting smell of warm milk and chicory coffee wafting through a small kitchen on a chilly morning. Welcome back to 1970s Hungary. Today we are taking a gentle, deeply nostalgic journey into a time when our pockets may have been entirely empty, but our hearts and our dining tables were always full. We are going to explore 20 incredibly cheap, everyday foods we ate when money was scarce, yet happiness was abundant. These are not just recipes, they are the very memories of our youth, wrapped in red paprika and grandmother's unconditional love. And please, stay with me until the very end, because the final memory we will share is the one sweet treat that defined every single Sunday of our childhood. A beautiful ritual you have surely tucked away in your heart. Before we step into those fragrant, bustling kitchens of our past, let us pause to remember how differently time flowed back then. In the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, the world moved at a much gentler, slower pace. There was no constant rush, no digital noise distracting us from the present moment. We did not have overflowing refrigerators or shelves bursting with exotic ingredients from distant lands. Instead, we had patience. We knew the profound value of waiting for the dough to rise in a warm corner of the room, or watching the soup simmer slowly on the stove for hours. Modern voices sometimes suggest that a life without our current technological comforts was a poorer life. But you and I know the absolute truth. We lived a life of incredible emotional wealth. Our riches were measured in the warmth of a shared table, the loud, joyful conversations echoing across the courtyard, and the sheer ingenuity of our mothers and grandmothers. They possessed the magical ability to take a handful of flour, a spoonful of lard, and a pinch of salt, and turn it into a feast that made us feel completely safe and deeply loved. Life was simpler, yes, but it was profoundly genuine. Now let us walk through that old kitchen door once more. Let us begin our journey with the absolute king of our childhood afternoons. Think back to that thick, rustic slice of white country bread, generously smeared with snowy white pork lard. We called it gyroskényér, and it was the ultimate symbol of our carefree youth. The bread was always cut thick, possessing a crust that required strong teeth and a soft, airy center. Our mothers or grandmothers would spread a heavy layer of fat across it, making sure it reached every single edge. Then came the magic. A vibrant, generous dusting of sweet red paprika, brought perhaps from Szeged or Kalocsa, falling over the white fat like a warm crimson blanket. To finish this masterpiece, they added thin, crisp half-moons of sharp purple onions, or perhaps a few slices of pale green peppers if it was summer. We would take this treasure in our hands, careful not to let the red grease drip onto our clothes, and run right back out to the courtyard to play. It was a meal born of pure necessity, costing almost nothing, yet no modern delicacy has ever managed to replicate that perfect symphony of crunch, creaminess, and sharp spice. It tasted like freedom, like endless summer afternoons, and like the simple, uncomplicated love of the hands that prepared it for us. And now let us remember the heavy iron pan resting on the stove, filled with the legendary krumpli z testa, or potato pasta. This was the ultimate comfort food for large families on a tight budget. The ritual began with the sound of onions sizzling in hot fat until they were perfectly golden. Then a generous spoonful of sweet red paprika was stirred in, instantly transforming the fat into a brilliant, fiery orange pool. Boiled, roughly crushed potatoes were folded into this fragrant base, followed by the freshly cooked square pasta. Our grandmothers would stir it vigorously, making sure every single piece of pasta was coated in that rich, paprika-laced potato mixture. The best part, however, was always at the very bottom of the pan. We would wait patiently for the edges to catch and toast, creating those slightly crispy, caramelized bits that we all fought over at the dinner table. Served alongside a jar of homemade sour pickles to cut through the heaviness, it was a meal that filled the stomach and brought an incredible sense of warmth to the entire house on cold winter evenings. It was humble, carbohydrate-heavy, and absolutely wonderful. Let us take a moment to recall the simplest, sweetest dessert of our childhood, the unforgettable bread with butter and sugar. In an era when fancy chocolates and packaged sweets were a rare luxury, this humble treat was our daily joy. Picture a fresh, soft slice of white bread, gently coated with a thin layer of butter. Over this, a generous shower of coarse, granulated sugar was sprinkled. The sensory experience of eating this was entirely unique. When you took a bite, your teeth first met the soft, pillowy bread, then sank into the smooth, creamy butter before finally experiencing the loud, satisfying crunch of the sugar crystals. Sometimes, if we were very lucky, a light dusting of cocoa powder was added on top, but the pure, unadorned version was just as magical. We would sit on the wooden porch or on the front steps of the house, swinging our legs, carefully eating our sugary bread while listening to the distant hum of the neighborhood. It was the purest form of innocent joy, a testament to how the most basic ingredients could bring boundless happiness to a child growing up in the 1970s. Do you remember the comforting aroma of boiling milk that signaled a bowl of teșbegris was on its way? Semolina pudding was the universal cure for a bad mood, a scraped knee, or a rainy afternoon. The process required constant attention. The milk was slowly heated on the stove, and the fine semolina was poured in a steady, delicate stream to avoid any lumps. The wooden spoon scraped the bottom of the pot rhythmically, thickening the mixture until it reached that perfect, creamy consistency. It was served piping hot in deep bowls, but the true ritual was in the decoration. We were handed a small shaker of precious cocoa powder mixed with powdered sugar, and we would carefully dust the snowy surface of the pudding. The heat of the teșbegris would instantly melt the cocoa, creating a dark, sweet, muddy layer on top. We would use our spoons to draw swirls and patterns, mesmerized by the contrast of colors. Some families preferred a huge dollop of homemade apricot jam, shining like a golden sun in the center. Whichever way you ate it, slowly scraping the cooling edges first, it was a bowl of pure, maternal comfort. There was one particular soup that truly defined the meaning of making something out of nothing. Let us remember the hambu komeni mahleves, or caraway seed soup. When the pantry was completely bare and the end of the month approached, this soup was our savior. The preparation was an act of quiet magic. A small amount of lard was melted in a pot, and flour was added to create a dark, nutty roux. Into this, a handful of whole caraway seeds was tossed. The moment those little seeds hit the hot fat, the most incredible, earthy, toasted aroma would explode into the kitchen, reaching every corner of the house. Cold water was quickly poured in, followed by a pinch of salt and perhaps a dash of sweet paprika for color. That was it. No meat, no expensive vegetables. Yet, when it was served steaming hot in our bowls, often poured over crispy croutons made from days-old stale bread, it tasted like a feast. The toasted bread would soak up the flavorful broth, softening just enough to melt in the mouth. This soup taught us that a skilled hand and a clever mind could coax deep, satisfying flavors from the absolute bare minimum. Now, let us turn our memories to a dish that always ended with wide, black-toothed smiles across the dinner table. The beloved makos testa, or poppy seed pasta. The preparation of this dish was a family event that required physical effort. The heavy cast-iron poppy seed grinder was firmly clamped to the edge of the kitchen table. We children would take turns turning the wooden handle, listening to the satisfying crunch as the tiny blue-black seeds were crushed into a dark, fragrant paste. The smell of freshly ground poppy seeds is entirely unique, earthy, deep, and slightly nutty. This fresh grind was then generously mixed with powdered sugar. Meanwhile, broad, flat pasta was boiled until tender. The hot pasta was drained and immediately tossed with a little fat or butter, then thoroughly coated in the sweet, dark poppy seed mixture. It was a heavy, incredibly filling meal, often served on Fridays when meat was traditionally avoided. We would eat it greedily, and afterwards we would grin at each other, our teeth covered in tiny black specks, laughing at our reflection in the kitchen window. We must not forget the vibrant red stew that was a staple in every single Hungarian household, the hearty paprika skrumpli. Potato paprika was the ultimate demonstration of how our incredible Hungarian spice could elevate the most basic ingredient. Huge pots of it were cooked on stovetops or outside over open fires. It started, as all good things did, with onions frying in fat, followed by a mountain of peeled, quartered potatoes and a heavy hand of sweet paprika. If the budget allowed, a single, thin link of cheap smoked sausage was sliced into the pot. The smoky flavor of that one piece of meat would miraculously infuse the entire cauldron of potatoes. The thick, starchy red gravy that formed at the bottom of the pot was the true prize. We would take thick slices of fresh, crusty white bread and drag them through the gravy, making sure not to leave a single drop behind. It was a meal that brought the whole family together, eating from deep plates, wiping our mouths with cloth napkins, entirely satisfied by the rich, savory warmth of this beautiful, rustic stew. Let us recall those slow, beautiful Sunday mornings when the smell of hot oil and frying bread served as our alarm clock. Bundaskenyer, the savory Hungarian answer to French toast, was the genius way our families ensured that not a single crumb of stale bread ever went to waste. Thick slices of 2 or 3-day-old bread, which had become too hard to enjoy on their own, were dipped into a simple mixture of beaten eggs and a little salt. They were then gently lowered into a pan of sizzling oil. The dry bread would drink up the egg and fry to a perfect, puffy golden brown. The crust became wonderfully crispy, while the inside turned soft and steamy. But the absolute most crucial part of the ritual happened right after frying. While the bread was still piping hot, we would take a raw, peeled clove of garlic and rub it vigorously over the rough, fried surface. The heat of the bread would release the pungent, spicy oils of the garlic into the air. We would eat it sitting at the kitchen table, washing it down with mugs of steaming hot, sweet tea, heavily flavored with lemon juice. It was a breakfast of champions, born from frugality. As we journey through our memories, we arrive at the height of a scorching Hungarian summer, the season of pale yellow wax peppers, juicy tomatoes, and the legendary lecho. When the garden was overflowing and vegetables cost mere pennies at the local market, this vibrant pepper stew was on the menu almost every day. The kitchen would grow incredibly hot as the large pot simmered away. First came the onions and the paprika, then a mountain of sliced, crisp yellow peppers, and finally the chopped tomatoes that would break down and create a rich, acidic, sweet sauce. The sound of the peppers blistering and softening in the pan was the soundtrack of August. Lecho was stretched in many clever ways to feed a hungry family. Sometimes, beaten eggs were scrambled into it at the very last minute, creating a thick, hearty texture. Other times, a handful of rice was cooked directly in the stew, absorbing all those magnificent juices. Served with an obligatory thick slice of bread to mop up the fragrant, oily red sauce, it was the absolute essence of a Hungarian summer captured in a single bowl. And now let us think of a dish that often sparked a friendly yet passionate debate at the dining table. The wonderfully unique kapostas testa, or cabbage pasta. It was a true masterpiece of peasant cooking. A large head of cheap white cabbage was grated by hand, heavily salted, and left to sweat in a bowl until it released its juices. Then it was squeezed dry and fried in fat for what seemed like hours. The cabbage had to be cooked slowly until it collapsed and turned a deep, beautiful caramelized brown. The smell of frying cabbage is unmistakable, rich, savory, and slightly sweet, permeating the curtains and our clothes. This golden soft cabbage was then mixed with square pasta. But here is where the great divide occurred. Half of the family insisted on eating it savory, covering their portion in a heavy snowfall of freshly ground black pepper, loving the sharp, spicy contrast. The other half, usually the children, demanded their portion be sprinkled generously with powdered sugar, turning it into a strange, wonderful, sweet and savory dessert. Whichever side you chose, it was an unforgettable taste of home. Let us travel back to a warm summer evening, sitting on the concrete steps of our house, waiting for the massive pot on the stove to finish its work. It was time for fot kukorica, simple boiled corn on the cob. In the countryside, or even in the city markets, corn was incredibly cheap and abundant. Our mothers would buy an armful of ears, still wrapped in their green husks. The preparation was a ritual in itself. The husks were peeled back but never thrown away. They were used to line the bottom of a huge pot, and the delicate, silky threads of corn silk were tucked in as well, because they infused the boiling water with a deep, sweet, earthy flavor. When the corn was finally tender, glowing like golden treasure through the steam, it was lifted out with tongs. We would take a hot cob, burning our fingertips, and rapidly rub coarse salt all over the juicy yellow kernels. The salt would stick to the moisture, enhancing the natural sweetness of the corn perfectly. We sat outside, biting the kernels off in neat rows, the juice running down our chins, watching the fireflies begin to dance in the twilight. Do you remember the bright, comforting color of paradicsomoska? Tomato cabbage was a dish that defined both our grandmother's kitchens and the bustling canteens of our schools. It was a magnificent example of how to make a little go a very long way. Shredded white cabbage was cooked down slowly until tender, then submerged in a thick, vibrant sauce made from pureed tomatoes, a little flour to thicken it, and a surprisingly generous amount of sugar. The result was a profoundly thick, sweet and sour stew that coated the back of a spoon. It was incredibly cheap to produce, requiring no fancy ingredients, yet it delivered a massive punch of flavor. We usually ate it entirely on its own, with just a piece of fresh bread on the side to push the cabbage onto our forks. The sweetness of the tomatoes, combined with the earthy, slightly bitter edge of the cooked cabbage, created a harmony that we did not fully appreciate as children, but deeply crave now as adults. It was a warm, bright bowl of comfort on the gloomiest of autumn days. Let us take a moment to honor the humble egg, the absolute savior of the 1970s pantry, and the star of the comforting tojaslevs, or egg drop soup. When the month was long and the money was short, meat was out of the question, but there were always a few eggs to be found. This soup started with a simple paprika-infused broth, often flavored with a little garlic or caraway. The true magic happened when the broth reached a rolling boil. Our mothers would crack a few eggs into a cup, whisk them gently, and then pour them in a thin, steady stream into the swirling hot liquid. The egg would instantly cook into delicate, cloud-like ribbons, spreading throughout the pot. A splash of sharp vinegar was almost always added at the very end, giving the soup a wonderful, tangy bite that awakened the senses. We would blow on the hot broth, watching the yellow and white egg ribbons dance in the red liquid. It was a humble, inexpensive soup, yet it tasted so incredibly rich and satisfying, providing us with the warmth and energy we needed to run outside and play until the street lights came on. Ah, the mornings of our childhood. Before school, the kitchen table held a very specific ritual. Let us recall the iconic tin box decorated with a friendly bear, the legendary Maci. Real coffee was a luxury and certainly not meant for children, but this roasted chicory and malt substitute was our daily morning brew. The smell of roasted chicory is deeply nostalgic, a slightly bitter, toasty aroma that filled the sleepy kitchen. A spoonful of this dark powder was stirred into a mug of warm, sweetened milk, turning it a comforting pale beige. But the drink was only half of the experience. The true joy was the kifli, the classic crescent-shaped Hungarian pastry roll. It was always fresh, soft on the inside, with a very thin, slightly chewy crust. We would tear off the pointy ends of the kifli and dunk them directly into the warm Maci. We had to time it perfectly, holding it in the liquid just long enough to soak up the sweet coffee, but pulling it out before the soft bread broke off and fell to the bottom of the mug. It was our daily communion, a simple, incredibly cheap breakfast that started every single day with warmth. When winter arrived and the snow piled high outside our windows, fresh fruit became a distant memory, save for one resilient staple. Let us remember the fragrant magic of sult alma, or baked apples. Apples were stored carefully in the cold cellar, lasting through the darkest months. When a sweet treat was desired and there were no pennies to spare for chocolate, our mothers would select the slightly wrinkled, perhaps bruised apples that needed to be eaten. They were placed on a small baking sheet and pushed into the hot oven. We would sit by the stove, waiting. Slowly, the most intoxicating aroma would begin to fill the house. The smell of hot fruit, caramelizing natural sugars, and warmth. When they were pulled out, the skins had burst open, revealing the steaming, incredibly soft flesh inside. If we were lucky, a tiny sprinkle of sugar and a pinch of cinnamon was dusted over the top, melting instantly into the hot juices. We ate them with small spoons, scraping the sweet, soft apple away from the core and the tough skin. It was the cheapest winter dessert imaginable, yet it felt like a grand festive treat on a cold, dark afternoon.
Let us recall a dish that perfectly balanced the rich, the savory, and the incredibly satisfying, the legendary turoszczusa. Cottage cheese pasta was a staple that often relied on ingredients brought from relatives in the village. A large batch of flat, irregular pasta was boiled until soft. The magic of this dish lay in its brilliant contrasts. The hot steaming pasta was heavily mixed with crumbly, slightly tart Hungarian cottage cheese, known as turo. Then came a generous dollop of rich, cold sour cream, melting slowly into the warm pasta. But the crown jewel of this dish, the element that elevated it from simple to extraordinary, was the topping of freshly fried bacon bits, or topirtiu. The fat from the bacon was often stirred into the pasta itself, while the tiny, crispy, salty cubes were scattered on top.
When you took a bite, you experienced the warmth of the pasta, the cool tang of the sour cream, the soft crumble of the cheese, and the sudden loud crunch of the salty bacon. It was a heavy, magnificent meal that required very little money but delivered an immense amount of satisfaction to a hungry family. We must also dedicate a moment to the most iconic condiment of our youth, a small tube that held the power to transform a plain slice of bread into a feast. I am speaking, of course, of piros arany, the legendary red-gold paprika paste. This little aluminum tube was a staple in every single Hungarian refrigerator. When we came rushing inside from playing football or riding our bicycles, absolutely starving but with dinner still hours away, this was our quickest remedy. We would take a slice of bread, perhaps smear it with a tiny bit of butter or fat if we had the patience, and then carefully squeeze a bright, vibrant red ribbon of the salty, concentrated paprika paste across the top. It was intensely flavorful, salty, savory, and bursting with the essence of pure Hungarian peppers. We would eat it standing in the kitchen, savoring the sharp bite of the paste against the soft bread, before running right back out the door.
It was the ultimate, inexpensive fast food of the 1970s. A small tube of brilliant flavor that made even the driest crust of bread taste like an absolute delicacy.
Now, let us think back to a dish that carried the soul of the Hungarian plains directly into our small kitchens. The heavy, smoky, incredibly filling slambuch. Originally a meal cooked by shepherds in a cast-iron cauldron over an open fire, our clever mothers adapted it for the stovetop when funds were low. It required only 3 basic ingredients: pasta, potatoes, and a little smoked bacon fat. The secret was in the technique. The dry pasta was first roasted in the hot fat until it turned a deep, nutty brown, absorbing all the smoky flavor. Only then were the diced potatoes and a little water added. The pot was covered and the mixture was left to steam and cook together until the potatoes began to fall apart and coat the roasted pasta in a thick, starchy embrace. Even cooked on a gas stove in a small city apartment, slambuch retained that rustic, robust character.
It was incredibly heavy, designed to keep a person full for an entire day of hard labor. We would eat it greedily, feeling its solid, comforting warmth settle in our stomachs, deeply satisfied by this frugal, ancient recipe. Do you remember the days when bread was still baked at home, or when dough was brought fresh from the local baker? On those precious days, a small piece of the dough was always saved to create the ultimate rustic treat, the kenyérlángos, or flatbread. This was a true reward for patience. The leftover dough was stretched out into a rough, oval shape and baked quickly, often on the very edge of the oven or right on top of the stove. It puffed up, developing charred, blistered spots and a chewy, incredibly resilient crust. The moment it came off the heat, while it was still too hot to comfortably hold, the ritual began. A raw clove of garlic was rubbed furiously over the rough surface, melting into the hot bread. Then a thick layer of cold sour cream was spread across it, followed by scattered rings of purple onions or a sprinkle of coarse salt. We would tear off huge steaming chunks, the hot dough stretching and pulling, the garlic and sour cream mixing in our mouths. It was the absolute pinnacle of simple, rustic joy, costing mere pennies, but delivering a taste that no modern pizzeria could ever hope to rival.
And finally, we arrive at the sweet golden crown of our childhood weekends. No matter how tight the budget was during the week, Sunday afternoons almost always promised the magic of palacinta, our beloved thin Hungarian crepes. The butter was a masterclass in stretching ingredients. Just flour, a single egg, water, and perhaps a splash of soda water to make them impossibly light. We would stand by the stove, mesmerized by the rhythmic hiss as our grandmothers poured the thin liquid into the hot oiled pan. With a flick of the wrist, they would flip the pale, golden discs perfectly. The true beauty lay in the filling. We rarely had expensive chocolates or creams. Instead, we relied on the treasures from the pantry, the thick, dark plum jam or the bright, glowing apricot jam made by our grandmothers the previous summer. We would spread a thin layer of the jam, roll the palacinta into a tight cylinder, and eat it with our hands. The sticky, sweet jam would inevitably squeeze out of the ends, covering our fingers. It was a celebration of family, a sweet reward for a long week, and a pure expression of love.
As we look back at these 20 humble meals, we realize a profound truth.
We do not just miss the taste of the warm lard on rustic bread, or the sweet crunch of sugar on butter. What we truly miss is who we were in those moments. We miss the lively, crowded kitchens, the rough, loving hands of our grandmothers, and the slow, beautiful rhythm of a life where waiting for a pot of soup to boil was a shared joy, not a burden. We lived in a time when having absolutely no money did not mean we were poor. It meant we relied on each other, on tradition, and on love to fill our tables. These recipes are the heritage of our generation, a testament to surviving and thriving with grace and a smile. If this journey brought a tear to your eye or a warm memory to your heart, please subscribe to our channel and like this video so we can continue to preserve these beautiful histories together.
And now, I want to ask you, what was the one cheap, comforting meal your mother or grandmother always made for you when you were growing up? Please, share your most precious memories in the comments below, and let us keep the spirit of our youth alive together.